The latest. Thank you for your love and support. And I welcome you all to my channel. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for how far you have brought me. In 1964, a Chinese president made a promise to African nations. Some of the countries involved are Egypt, Sudan, and so on. The West, in this modern day, think that China is taking Africa away from them. These people have been our colonizers. They have been in Africa for several years, for centuries. Yet, Africa is where it is. Wherever the West come into Africa, they want to dictate to us as to what we should do. Stressing us, threatening us. If you don't do this, we'll do that. If you don't do that, you... So, the West approach to Africa has been master and a servant, forgetting that Africa is grown. We are in the 21st century, yet these people still want to treat Africans as if we are nothing. And that has been their approach for a very long time since they came into contact with the African. But when China came as an equal partner. China sees Africa as an equal partner. And when the President Xi came in contact with Africans, he made a very big promise to us. And according to him, China and Africa relationship is not going to be that of a master and a servant, but equal treatment. They are going to loan us, even if they give us aid. It's not going to be like they are giving us the aid to keep us poor, to put punishment on us, but the aid is going to be for us to be able to have self-reliance. And even when the time comes and we are not able to pay, they are going to extend the time for us. This man also said they are into partnership with Africa to see that the two parties win. It's like two communities coming together to see how best they can help themselves. And they're also going to help Africa develop machinery. It will be self-sufficient. It will not be dependent on China. According to the president, China and Africa are going to have a bilateral cooperation, mutual respect, and they are going to respect African sovereignty. Unlike those in the West who always come and see Africa as children, commanding and telling us what we should do in our own continent. During the China-African Summit this year, China pledged 51 billion support to Africa. And some other African countries, about 30 of them, are going to have tariff-free whenever they buy something from China. When the West heard this, they were not happy and saying that China is trying to take Africa away from them with the kind of developmental projects that China is doing here. But the West, each time they come to Africa, are only here to exploit us. They want to keep us where we are, and that is why they gave us the kind of education that we have that is only for memorization. Somebody goes to learn engineering, yet the person cannot manufacture anything. They always want to suppress the black man so that the black man doesn't rise up. But China is not so. China is also trying to equip us with skills so that we'll be self-sufficient, just like Russia is doing. But the West have a problem, because when Africa should develop, if Africa is able to manufacture, turn the gold, refine our oil into finished goods, the West is doomed. And because of their selfish gain and selfish interest, Africa must stay where it is without any skills. So that when we stay this way, they will always have the upper hand on us. But China isn't like that. This thing was done in 1964. Until date, the friendship for over decades is still intact. So China and Africa didn't just start the friendship today like what we have grown up to see. That is now that China is trying to come into Africa and partnering with Africa. That is not the issue. China and Africa are friends for a very long time. It is now that leaders are realizing that the West have nothing good to offer Africa. Because of the sanctions they impose on us, our leaders are always afraid to partner more with other nations because the West will always tell us what to do. And when we don't do that, they threaten us. Like the LGBTQ or what have you that they call it, the homosexual. How can you force us to accept this thing that is against our culture and our tradition? And telling us if we don't accept this, this is what you are going to do to us. But this is not something that China does. China respects Africa, it respects our sovereignty, but these people still sit there and command us every blessed day as if we are children. We love people that will come in contact with Africans and respect us as human beings, and let us also have a voice and not treat us like children. We are not children, especially our natural resources are for us. And we should have total control over the gold, the diamond, the bauxite, everything that we have in Africa. We should have a say in it. It's not meant for anybody. Africa is for Africans. Africans do not belong to anybody. You love our natural resources, yet you don't love the black people. Each time we come into your country, see how you treat us as if we are not human beings. Even in our own continent, you still come to African continent and you are trying to tell us what to do. United we stand. Our only strength is unity. So that's the latest around the world. And in China,
other ties between China and Africa. China has built 10,000 kilometers of railways, created 100,000 kilometers of roads, and laid down 200,000 kilometers of fiber optic cable in Africa. And of course the Chinese have built ports, schools, hospitals and stadiums too. But you know what? The key is not money or even infrastructure. It's a deep friendship which comes out of shared history, a long history. China's partnership with Africa is much, much older than people think. Now, the press keeps reporting that the Africa outreach is a strategy by Beijing's current leaders. Not so. It started long ago. In the 1950s, 7 decades ago, many African nations were drawn towards the Chinese model, in which socialist civil servants used capitalist mechanisms to create wealth for the benefit of the people. By the end of the 1950s, China had signed bilateral trade agreements with Algeria, Egypt, Guinea, South Africa and Sudan. In December 1963, Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai started a lengthy tour of Africa, setting foot in 10 different African countries. Now, at that time, Western nations largely ignored both Asia and Africa, seeing them as either desperately poor places for colonial exploitation or rather sad destinations for charity aid projects. The highest level US policy document said that America must work to try to maintain the wealth disparity between the rich West and poor Asia. And that's exactly what they're doing today. But China, seeing Africans as brothers in socialism, had a very different attitude. During the state visit to Ghana in January 1964, Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai outlined principles under which China would work with Africa. Now, these precepts, although made 60 years ago, look remarkably modern. Now, this is a list of the pledges. I won't read all of it to you, but I'll summarize the main points. Aid is not about us giving you money as an act of charity, Zhou said. Instead, it's about finding ways two communities can help each other. I call this principle the trade is aid model. Zhou also defined principles about loans. Whenever we loan you money, it will be low interest or interest free, he said. And if you have difficulty repaying it, we'll extend the period as much as possible. Zhou believed that loans should never create a situation where one country becomes dependent on another. Instead, the aim is for the recipient to develop self-reliance, the document says. Zhou also realized that a healthy trade relationship should not just be a case of one country selling machinery or other stuff to another. What is important is to transfer technical know-how, he wrote. Now, the Chinese leader also believed that economic relationships between countries should not turn one into a vassal of the other. Sovereignty must be respected, the pledge says. Now, he specified these principles in this written list of promises made by China to the nations of Africa in 1964. And you can see that they're still used today, although under different names such as, preferential loans, repayment extensions, technology transfer, and so on. What is the West's reaction to all this? Well, the US does a lot of good in Africa too. America is a rich country and probably the biggest cash donor to the African continent. Unfortunately, the US has a tendency to politicize everything and will also use its favorite tools, covert disinformation and demonization. Last time it was reported that the Chinese were working hard in Africa, the US sent Kamala Harris to the scene to turn people against China. Now, that's not me saying that. That's the New York Times. That's the address of Kamala Harris's biggest fan club. Now, look at this 2023 article. Vice President Kamala Harris's visit to Africa last week was designed to send a message. China is not your friend. The US is. The New York Times even recorded a podcast to reinforce that message. China is not your friend. The US is. I think the difference in culture between East and West is clearly encapsulated right there. China is far from perfect, but it does work hard to follow its trade is aid principle, setting up mutually beneficial relationships with multiple countries. In contrast, the US is unfortunately quick to throw away its most fundamental values in the rush to stay number one in everything. Oh yes, they give plenty of aid cash too, but with the money comes a message. Here's some money. Now we want you to abandon your old friends. But the truth has a way of coming out. Even in the New York Times podcast, a speaker went into detail about how China had changed people's lives. He said that it used to be impossible to get to where you were going in Nairobi because of all the traffic jams. Then the Chinese arrived and built infrastructure. Now you can see Nairobi has highways and overpasses and junctions. Listen to what he says.
I used to, for instance, study at a university on the other side of Nairobi, and basically the road that would go to that university was like a 2-lane road, and now it's one of the biggest highways in this region. It's up to 8 different lanes.
Wow.
And so whenever you think about how the traffic in Nairobi was so bad in the past, and how there are all these highways and expressways that are opening up all across the city, everybody just thinks about China. Mm-hmm. Everybody just thinks, oh yeah, it used to take me this many hours to get to one place, right. But thank God for China.
Humanity can have a great future if we help each other in a cooperative way. Let's make sure the warmongers don't take that away. As Lao Tzu said 24 centuries ago, those who advise the ruler on the way do not want the world subdued with weapons, for such deeds bring on retaliation. Thorn bushes grow where armies have camped.